Reedy Creek is in the news again. The state of Florida is on the verge of passing legislation that could be potentially disastrous for the Walt Disney Corporation. We'll cover what's possible and if it could happen, all coming up next on Fresh Baked. Hi guys, David here with Fresh Baked. Reedy Creek is in the news again, and I have to be honest, I was not expecting to be having this conversation with you again just a couple of weeks after our previous video. I thought it would be another year or so before Reedy Creek came up again. But we're here, and it's not for a good reason, not for the Walt Disney Company. On Wednesday, the Florida Senate voted 23-16 to dissolve the Reedy Creek Improvement District legislation, which puts Disney as close as they've ever been to losing this very advantageous situation. And we're going to talk about what this means, what it is and what it isn't, how likely it is to actually happen, and what Disney's options are. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's happening, and there's a lot of really bad takes out there on social media. But I've consulted with some very intelligent people, some informed people on this topic, and I'm going to do my best to try to separate the true nature of what is happening from the drama and hyperbole that you're probably going to see on social media. But first, a primer. What is the Reedy Creek Improvement District? The RCID was formed in 1967 when Disney was trying to build Walt Disney World, and it essentially gave Disney, as well as a few other property owners and businesses in Orange and Osceola counties, the freedom to run their own city. For all intents and purposes, Disney acts as its own government, and they are free to operate Walt Disney World however they deem appropriate. They don't have to go through any city, county, or state agencies to get anything done. They can simply just do it. Sounds wild, I know, and it probably is. You don't see or hear this kind of thing very often, if ever. Corporations acting as their own government, but it's been this way for more than 50 years. And if anybody who's observing this is being honest, they will tell you that Disney has been a very good corporate citizen, a very responsible corporate citizen. They have not taken advantage of this freedom. Some even use this as a model, as a benchmark for how things could be if you're able to successfully separate business, economy from bureaucracy. However, despite the apparent win-win nature of this for both the state, the city, and for Disney, despite that win-win nature, Florida's governor and those who support this bill, or dissolving of the RCID, maintain that no single corporation should be given any kind of preferential treatment from the state, and that the RCID has actually outlived its usefulness when you consider that the RCID was formed so that Disney could build Walt Disney World because the city and the county couldn't do it. They didn't have the ability to, but Disney did. Walt Disney World's built. Not to mention Universal Studios or Busch Gardens. They don't have similar agreements. They have to go through all the usual red tape and bureaucracy as it pertains to getting things done in the state of Florida. Red tape and bureaucracy that Disney just gets to skip over. It's a great advantage for Disney, and one that they are going to absolutely want to defend. I've heard talk on social media they should just let it go, that it might even be better for Disney if they didn't have the RCID, because then they wouldn't have to pay for anything. I'm here to tell you that's not the case. The people that I've spoken with, when I asked them on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this on the disaster meter for Disney? It ranged from anywhere from 9 to 11 or 12. This is a total disaster. If this were to be done, Disney would lose a tremendous competitive advantage, not to mention it would cost them, well, we're going to get into that. Suffice it to say, if the RCID is resolved, it would be bad. Very, very bad. Game changer. But not just for Disney. Couple of things. All those day-to-day operations outside the Disney parks will be taken over by the city. Roads, fire, water, police. Right now, Disney runs and pays for all of this. The city would run and pay for all of that. And the city would pay for all of that through taxes assessed to its residents and businesses. Actually, as it turns out, we can take a very detailed look at what that balance sheet looks like right now. We can see that the RCID has expenses of $315 million plus for 2021. There's $20 million right there for fire services, for example. Nearly $100 million for roads. There is revenue, $308 million in revenue, most of which is via taxes, property taxes, almost $140 million worth. Yes, it does look like Disney and other businesses and property owners in the RCID do pay taxes. They just pay taxes to themselves. And they use those taxes to pay for all of those services. Note also that per this balance sheet, the RCID is operating at a $7 million deficit for 2021. They are spending more, $7 million more per year than they are earning in revenue. And that actually includes more than $6 million in proprietary capital contributions from a private source, aka Disney. They are the private source. They're just gifting basically $6 million to the bottom line. So actually, it's closer to a $13 million deficit. There's also about $2 billion in long-term debt. We can see almost $1 billion here on this spreadsheet, plus more post-employment benefits such as pensions and health care, most notably. In the county would also have to take on this debt as well. Maybe asking, why would the county or the city have to take on Disney's debt? Well, that's standard. Every city, every county, every state, whatever, they all borrow money in order to build their cities and states. They issue bonds in order to finance those things, and then they turn it into long-term debt. So this is not a thing where Disney owes a bunch of money because they're building Disney World. That's infrastructure. That's $1 billion in infrastructure that the city would have to take on. And I bring up the balance sheet and the debt to illustrate that the RCID is more than just Disney having free reign to just do whatever they want. It's not a one-sided situation. There is a lot of responsibility on Disney's part in order to run this as if they were a city. And again, like I said, they have been very good corporate citizens. They have been very responsible with this freedom. They have not taken it lightly. They don't abuse it. They are very financially sound. Now, I should also bring up that these numbers should not be considered an equivalency to what would happen if the RCID was dissolved and all of this would be transferred to the city. It's not a one-for-one relationship. Certainly, some of those debts and some of those obligations would maintain. Disney would still be responsible for those. Certainly, not all of the debt would be transferred to the city. Some of that debt would be taken on by Disney. And certainly, if Disney was a regular business like anybody else and not their own government, they probably would be paying more in property taxes or other local taxes. But so too would the residents of this district. So too would the residents of Orange County and Osceola counties. They would be paying more in taxes because now they've got to take on and pay for some of those police and fire and roads and the bond debt and all that. They're going to have to pay for that as well. Not all of it, but their share. And I'm here to tell you, people don't like to pay more taxes, generally speaking. Now, here's another interesting component of this proposed legislation, and that's the timing. Very specific timing. That is to say that the governor's legislation would seek to dissolve special districts. The RCID is a special district. They want to dissolve all special districts, but only those that were enacted prior to 1968. RCID was 1967. Anything else after 1968 is fine. So one could easily observe and say, well, this is a targeted attack at Disney, and they're probably right. But I would again say that the goal of the governor in this situation is to remove any instance where a single corporation has been given preferential treatment. And I would gather, or I would guess, that all those other special districts do not have a similar or equivalent situation where a single corporation is being given special consideration. That's why, though it does look like it's a target, it's because Disney is one of a kind. It's the only one of its kind. Meanwhile, as I mentioned in our previous video, this is not the first time that the RCID has come up. This is not the first time that people have sought to dissolve that agreement. So it's not like DeSantis is coming up with this out of thin air. This has been brought up before, and Disney has defeated or lobbied its way out of those proposed dissolutions. So I don't think it's as simple as DeSantis, the Florida governor, trying to, take Disney down a notch. I mean, it could be. There could be a component of that, perhaps, but it's not a black and white issue. It's not just that or just this. There's lots of gray area here. These stories are never black and white. Situations like this, they're never black and white. There are an infinite number of variables, infinite shades of gray, as it were. This is a very complex situation with a lot of moving parts, which is why I caution folks, again, we're talking about social media, and people just go off. They just go off. They pick a side and they go off. It's this or it's that. It's not. So what can Disney do today? Well, let's assume that the House vote, it was in the Senate yesterday, And I do believe the House is voting today and I expect it to be passed in the House as well. Assuming that does happen, it would then basically simmer. It would just sit there. That resolution would sit there for about a year. Nothing becomes final until I think it's June of 2023. In that time, Disney can sue, a form of restraining order, as it were, to limit the state's ability to enact that legislation, and it gives Disney time to fight it. Disney could lobby the Florida legislature to win votes, which, by the way, it's a little more difficult today than it would have been, let's say, a year ago, because Disney has already promised, they have said they're not going to be donating to any Florida campaigns, at least those Florida campaigns that aren't in alignment with Disney's views. But they need to switch votes from those who aren't in their view, that aren't in alignment with their view. They need to change the minds of people who disagree with Disney. That's going to be a tough task. So if all efforts fail and the RCID is dissolved, that would be a disaster for Disney. Everything is worse. They're likely going to have to pay more in taxes. Not state taxes, by the way. These are going to be local taxes. Disney's already paying state taxes. It was brought up by Stephen Roach, I think, in the first one, where he said that it's a tax dodge. It's not a tax dodge. Disney has been paying more than their share of state taxes already. Most of Florida's income is derived from sales tax, which obviously Disney is generating a lot of sales tax revenue at Walt Disney World. But they would probably be paying more in local taxes, which would support the local governments. We're talking probably a couple $100 million a year is my guess. They'll also have to file for permits. They'll have to go through local agencies and approval processes to get anything done in the parks. Everything will take longer and cost more. It would very likely end Disney's investments in the Walt Disney World parks. They wouldn't do anything for years. Nothing would happen. And I'm talking about development, expansion, upgrades. It would end. Epcot. I don't even know what would happen to Epcot. I mean, that's down the road. They might be able to finish Epcot, but goodness, you would not see Epcot would never have happened if RCID didn't exist. If you're familiar with Disneyland in Anaheim and what they have to go through, then you know what I'm talking about. It's very difficult to get things done right now in the city of Anaheim. It has been for years. We mentioned this in the last video also. Disneyland Forward. That whole thing is just a lobbying effort to get the city of Anaheim to change how they zone certain pieces of land that Disney owns. So it would take years just to get them to change their mind about what to do, let alone whether or not they're going to put a shovel in the ground. So we're talking more money, more time, more headaches on a very large scale. And by the way, most of that expense is going to be passed on to you, to guests. You might have noticed that Disney World tickets are considerably cheaper. Tickets and annual passes are considerably cheaper in Florida than they are here in Anaheim, and this is the reason why. Now, some have suggested on social media that Disney should pull up stakes and move Walt Disney World out of the state of Florida into, Puerto Rico or Texas or something like that. This is, to put it plainly, crazy talk. Disney is 100% absolutely embedded in the state of Florida. No matter what happens to the Reedy Creek Improvement District, Disney World is not going anywhere. It is there for the duration, forever. Disney will stay in Florida and keep doing business no matter what happens. So, what will happen? Well, again, I've asked people on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the most likely outcome of the RCID? Maybe a 2, maybe a 1, not likely at all. It's figured that there are 2 possible outcomes that are most likely, and it all depends on how serious the Florida legislation is. How dug in are they to this idea? For example, some have argued that this is pure political theater for Governor Ron DeSantis and those who support the program. That DeSantis is seeking only to score points in the public eye for taking on big business. But since nothing can happen for more than a year between now and June of 2023, it'll take at least that long for anything to happen. He can score the points today without having to actually do anything, for those political purposes, be that his 2023 Senate re-election campaign or a possible presidential run in 2024. Between now and June, it could also just sort of fade away. They could just forget about it. And they'd be like, I don't even know, what are we talking about? Reedy Creek? That's been around for 50 years. Who cares? That's a possibility. And if it turns out to be the case, then Disney just needs to sort of ride it out. Maybe make some concessions behind the scenes, do a little lobbying, but otherwise just sort of let things work itself out. Another possibility is that DeSantis is very serious about this, and he does want to see it through. But not all the way to dissolution. We mentioned that this is a win-win for both the state, local governments, and Disney. And I don't think that even if DeSantis was trying to do this for political reasons, he's still trying to run his state. And dissolving the RCID is a lose-lose. Nobody wins if it's completely dissolved. That much I think everybody agrees with. So in the end, cooler heads prevail, and there are concessions or compromises made, but the agreement stays intact. For example, Disney would continue with their freedom, with their autonomy. They wouldn't have to go through all the bureaucratic red tape, but they might be asked to pay more taxes. Think about it this way. I brought this up, and it seems reasonable. In sports, there's such a thing as a luxury tax. There are teams that are professional teams that are at a competitive advantage. Teams like the New York Yankees or the LA Dodgers or the Los Angeles Lakers, these are teams that have built-in benefits, built-in advantages to teams, let's say in, I don't know, San Antonio or Seattle or something like that. So those teams have to pay a luxury tax. They have to share. They have to share their revenue with the other teams. Perhaps some kind of agreement like that is made with Universal, Busch Gardens, or other theme parks in the state of Florida. Disney could be asked to provide more affordable housing on their land, which is something they've already actually mentioned. We talked about that in a previous news video. Disney's building affordable housing in that county. They could be asked to do more of that. Here's an interesting thing that was brought up to me. Disney could be asked to raise their minimum wage. This could be done to save face on Disney's part, because making a compromise with the state could be seen as backing down from their original hardline stance about the previous measures. But raising the minimum wage would absolutely be a public relations win for the Disney company. And to me, this seems like the most likely scenario. The two extremes, I think, should be thrown out. The idea that nothing happens at all, or the idea that the whole thing gets dissolved completely. Those are two extreme examples. Those are the black and white examples. We live in a gray world, and I feel like the gray is going to hold out here. The gray is some kind of compromise between the state of Florida and Disney, where they get to keep their autonomy, but in exchange for certain concessions. Taxes, better wages, affordable housing, something to that effect. That's what I'm expecting. And there you have it. We've covered a lot of ground, and we've got about a year to figure out how things work out. The next page starts, I think, today with the House vote, and then we'll see what happens after that. Follow us on Instagram at _FreshBaked, on Twitter at FreshBakedDisney, that's fresh with no E, and on TikTok at FreshBakedDisney. If you like our show and want to show your support, please do consider joining our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/freshbaked. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, everybody. We love you very much. Be safe out there. Be kind to one another. Fresh Baked.